People often make bold declarations like, "I will never backslide," or "I will never deny God." Yet Scripture warns us that God holds us accountable for every word we speak and will test what we claim. For Jesus said in Matthew 12:36-37 that every idle word men speak they will give account for, and by our words we are justified or condemned. And Ecclesiastes 5:2-6 warns us not to be rash with our mouth, or quick to vow before God because He is in heaven and we are on earth. Therefore let our words be few. And Proverbs 18:21 says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue." The clearest example of this is the Apostle Peter, who confidently told Jesus in Luke 22:33 that he was ready to go with him to prison and to death, and again in Matthew 26:33 declared that though all men would be offended, he never would be. Yet Jesus answered him plainly in Luke 22:34 that before the rooster crowed, Peter would deny him 3 times. And Jesus warned him in Matthew 26:41 to watch and pray because the spirit is willing but the flesh is weak, showing that Peter overestimated himself while Jesus knew his true capacity. Scripture then records how Peter was questioned by a maid and others, and denied Christ 3 times in Luke 22:56-60 and Matthew 26:69-75, and when the rooster crowed, Peter remembered the word of the Lord and went out and wept bitterly according to Luke 22:61-62, revealing that experience is what exposes the truth about ourselves. As Jeremiah 17:9 says, "The heart is deceitful above all things." Proverbs 26 says most men proclaim their own goodness, and 1 Corinthians 10:12 warns that he who thinks he stands must take heed lest he fall. Jesus also revealed that Peter's testing was spiritual warfare, saying in Luke 22:31-32 that Satan desired to sift him as wheat, yet Christ had prayed that his faith would not fail, teaching us that God allows testing to humble us and reveal what is in our hearts, as written in Deuteronomy 8:2, and that trials refine us like silver, according to Psalm 66:10. And produce blessing if endured faithfully, as stated in James 1-12. Therefore, Scripture urges humility in speech. For Ecclesiastes 5:2 says, "Let thy words be few." Proverbs 17:28 says, "Even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace." And James 3:2 reminds us that offending in word reveals immaturity. When doubt arises, God calls us to remember what He has already done, as Psalm 77:11-12 teaches, because wisdom cannot be bought but comes from fearing the Lord according to Job 28:28, and God gives wisdom freely to those who ask as promised in James 1:5, teaching us not to trust our own strength but the Lord as commanded in Proverbs 3:5-6. Finally, growth in God requires honesty, not pretending strength. For Proverbs 28:13 says, "Those who confess and forsake sin find mercy." And 2 Corinthians 12:9 declares that God's strength is made perfect in weakness, which is why Jesus later restored Peter in John 21:15-17, proving that God does not honor boastful words but a humble heart that learns to rely fully on Him.